The Galactic Habitability Assessment Bureau operated on the principle that any species capable of interstellar travel must surely possess the wisdom to evaluate lesser civilizations with appropriate gravitas and precision. This principle, like most bureaucratic assumptions throughout the cosmos, was about as reliable as a chocolate teapot in a supernova. On the third moon of Zerion Prime, within a crystalline tower that hummed with the self-importance of 10,000 years of red tape, Director Yenthal of the Habitability Division reviewed the day's assignments. Earth, that unremarkable blue marble orbiting an average star in the unfashionable arm of the Milky Way, had finally reached the mandatory evaluation threshold. Some upstart species called humans had developed crude atomic technology, which meant they were now officially the galaxy's problem. Another primitive world, Yenthal muttered, his 6 eyes scanning the preliminary data with practiced boredom. The file was disappointingly thin, carbon-based bipeds, average lifespan of roughly 80 rotations, still burning fossil fuels like savages. Standard procedure called for a 48-hour assessment, after which the Bureau would either classify the world as suitable for contact or recommend it for immediate quarantine until the inhabitants evolved past their violent tendency. Yenthal assigned the case to his most efficient team, senior evaluator Nex and field analyst Blix, 2 Zephyrians whose species had achieved perfect pacifism roughly 3 millennia ago. They approached their work with the methodical precision of beings who had never experienced anything more emotionally stimulating than a mildly disappointing lunch. The assessment vessel materialized in Earth's upper atmosphere on a Tuesday morning, cloaked and bristling with sensors designed to catalog every aspect of human civilization, without the messy complications of actual interaction. Nex adjusted the observation array with practiced efficiency, while Blix prepared the standard evaluation forms that had been refined over centuries to identify dangerous species through careful analysis of their cultural expressions, conflict resolution method, and entertainment preferences. What they found exceeded their worst expectations. The first transmission they intercepted was something called Monday Night Football, and within minutes, both evaluators were frantically cross-referencing their xenobiology manual. Here was clear evidence of ritualized mass combat, complete with armored warriors engaging in territorial warfare while thousands of spectators screamed for blood. The commentators seemed to take particular pleasure in describing devastating hits and crushing defeats, their voices dripping with barely contained bloodlust. By the 7 moons, Nex whispered, recording detailed notes about humanity's apparent worship of violence. They broadcast their gladiatorial contests to the entire population. Look at these crowd reactions. They're celebrating acts of aggression. Blix nodded grimly, highlighting particularly disturbing footage of humans wearing the colors of opposing factions, their faces painted in tribal war patterns, consuming fermented beverages that clearly heightened their aggressive tendency. When one warrior successfully claimed territory from another, the crowd erupted in primitive war cries that the evaluator's translation software interpreted as defense. Defense. The situation deteriorated rapidly when they discovered something called cooking competition. Here, humans engaged in what appeared to be systematic torture of other life forms, using fire and sharp implements while judges critiqued their techniques for inflicting maximum suffering. The show's title, Hell's Kitchen, seemed to confirm their worst fears about human culinary practice. The lead torturer screamed at his subordinates with such vicious intensity that both evaluators required sedatives. They've weaponized food preparation, Blix reported with mounting horror, and they compete to see who can be most creative in their methods of destruction. But it was the discovery of human gaming that truly convinced them they were dealing with apex predators. Video games, with titles like Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto, revealed humanity's obsession with simulated violence on a scale that made their previous observations seem. Millions of humans spent hours each day practicing warfare, theft and mayhem in increasingly sophisticated virtual environments. Their training, Nex realized with dawning terror. The entire population is engaged in combat preparation. Look at these participation statistics. Even their younglings are drilling in tactical scenarios. The evaluators watched in fascinated revulsion as humans engaged in activities they could only interpret as preparation for galactic conquest. Chess was clearly a strategic warfare simulation. Sports were obviously combat training disguised as recreation. Even children's playground games seemed designed to teach predatory behavior and territorial dominance. When they intercepted news broadcasts, their worst fears were confirmed. Humans not only engaged in active warfare across their planet, but seemed to take perverse pride in documenting their conflicts for posterity. The evening news was essentially a daily briefing on humanity's various campaigns of aggression, complete with detailed casualty reports and strategic analysis. "Sir," Blix transmitted back to headquarters, "we're dealing with a species that broadcasts its military operations as entertainment. They appear to have weaponized every aspect of their civilization, including their recreational activities and food preparation. Recommend immediate quarantine classification." Nex was already preparing the preliminary report, his tentacles trembling slightly as he documented what was clearly the most dangerous species the Bureau had encountered in living memory. These humans didn't just practice violence, they celebrated it, refined it, and apparently considered it the foundation of their entire culture. As their shift ended and the assessment vessel prepared to gather additional data, both evaluators felt the weight of their responsibility to the galaxy. Somewhere below them, 7 billion apex predators were going about their daily lives, completely unaware that their routine activities had just convinced 2 of the galaxy's most experienced analysts that Earth represented an existential threat to civilized space. The irony, of course, was that the humans were having a perfectly ordinary day, blissfully unaware that their Monday night entertainment and competitive cooking shows had just sealed their planet's fate in the cosmic bureaucracy of the Galactic Habitability Assessment Bureau. The second day of observation began with what Nex and Blix had optimistically hoped might reveal humanity's gentler side. Instead, they discovered something called reality television, which promptly shattered any remaining illusions about human civilization's potential for redemption. Survivor appeared to be a documentary series, showcasing humanity's natural state, desperate individuals, abandoned on hostile terrain, forced to compete for basic resources, while systematically betraying their allies. The evaluators watched in morbid fascination as humans formed temporary alliances, only to break them with calculated precision, all while cameras documented their descent into primal savagery. "They've turned social manipulation into entertainment," Blix noted, updating the threat assessment with trembling appendages. "And the viewing audience seems to derive pleasure from watching their own kind suffer psychological torment." But Survivor was merely an appetizer to the main course of human barbarism. Something called The Bachelor revealed a mating ritual so complex and ruthless that it required a full anthropological team to decode. Multiple females competed for the attention of a single male through elaborate displays of dominance, emotional warfare, and strategic alliance formation. The male, meanwhile, engaged in what could only be described as psychological manipulation on an industrial scale. "They've weaponized reproduction," Nex reported to headquarters, his voice tight with professional concern. "The females employ sophisticated psychological tactics against each other, while the male maintains emotional control over the entire group. It's like watching a masterclass in behavioral dominance." The situation grew exponentially worse when they discovered human news media. Every channel seemed dedicated to documenting humanity's various conflicts with breathless wars, crime, political battles, economic warfare. Humans didn't just engage in these activities. They consumed them as daily entertainment while commentators provided expert analysis on tactical approaches and strategic failure. Breaking news alerts interrupted regular programming with the urgency typically reserved for planetary invasions. Yet they covered events as mundane as political disagreements and weather patterns. The humans treated everything as a potential crisis, maintaining a state of perpetual alertness that suggested a species constantly prepared for combat. Weather forecasters, in particular, baffled the evaluators. These individuals seemed to take genuine pleasure in predicting natural disasters, describing incoming storms with the enthusiasm of military strategists planning an assault. They used terminology like storm systems attacking the region, and weather fronts advancing across the territory, as if nature itself was engaged in humanity's endless warfare. The discovery of human literature provided no relief. Their greatest cultural achievements appeared to be detailed studies in violence and conflict. Epic tales of warfare, murder mysteries celebrating investigative violence, Romance novels that seemed to revolve around emotional conquest and submission. Even their children's stories featured characters overcoming adversaries through cunning and force. They indoctrinate their young with tales of conflict resolution through violence. Blix observed, analyzing a collection of fairy tales that featured everything from wolves being cooked alive to stepmothers being forced to dance in red-hot iron shoes. These aren't cautionary tales, they're training manuals. But it was the humans' relationship with their own mortality that truly convinced the evaluators they were dealing with an unprecedented threat. Something called extreme sports revealed a species that actively sought out life-threatening situations for recreational purposes. Humans willingly jumped from perfectly functional aircraft, climbed vertical rock faces without adequate safety equipment, and threw themselves off bridges while attached to elastic cords. They've turned survival instincts into entertainment, Nex reported, his voice barely steady. They seek out mortal peril for fun. This isn't just aggression, it's complete disregard for self-preservation. The medical data they intercepted suggested that humans had developed an entire industry around treating self-inflicted injuries from these recreational near-death experiences. Emergency rooms seemed specifically designed to handle the casualties of humanity's constant war against physics and common sense. Meanwhile, back at Bureau headquarters, Director Yentl was receiving increasingly alarming reports from the field team. Each transmission painted a darker picture of humanity's potential threat to galactic stability. The preliminary assessment had already triggered emergency protocols, and senior officials were being briefed on what appeared to be the most dangerous species discovery in Bureau history. "Sir," transmitted the night shift communications officer, "we're getting reports that these humans have developed something called social media. They appear to use it for coordinated psychological warfare against each other on a planetary scale." Yentl's 6 eyes widened as he reviewed the supplementary data. Humans engaged in daily battles over ideological territories, using weapons of mass emotional destruction disguised as posts and comments. They had created virtual arenas where billions of individuals could simultaneously engage in psychological combat, all while maintaining the pretense of social networking. The evidence was overwhelming. Humanity wasn't just violent. They had refined violence into an art form, turning every aspect of their existence into either preparation for conflict or celebration of it. Their entertainment, their news, their recreation, even their attempts at romance, seemed designed around principles of dominance, competition, and strategic manipulation. As the assessment team prepared their formal recommendation, both evaluators felt the weight of cosmic responsibility. They weren't just evaluating another primitive species. They were potentially preventing a galactic catastrophe. These humans, with their casual relationship with violence, and their apparent immunity to self-preservation instincts, represented everything the civilized galaxy had spent millennia evolving beyond. The formal documentation was already being prepared. Earth would be classified as a Class X threat, unsuitable for contact until its inhabitants evolved past their predatory phase. The galaxy would be protected from humanity's influence for the foreseeable future, thanks to the diligent work of 2 evaluators who had correctly identified the most dangerous species in known space. They had no way of knowing that somewhere below, humans were simply enjoying another perfectly normal day of watching television, reading books, and engaging in recreational activities that their own species considered perfectly reasonable entertainment. The formal declaration arrived at 0847 Galactic Standard Time on a Thursday that would go down in bureaucratic history as the day the Galactic Habitability Assessment Bureau made its most spectacularly wrong decision since classifying the peaceful Zen monks of Altair 7 as dangerous contemplative. Director Yentl stood before the emergency assembly of the Galactic Council, his official statement prepared with the kind of bureaucratic precision that had kept the galaxy's paperwork flowing smoothly for millennia. The assembled representatives, beings from 47 different star systems, waited with the patient resignation of creatures who had attended far too many emergency sessions about newly discovered threats to galactic stability. "Esteemed colleagues," Yentl began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, after extensive analysis by our most experienced field team, the Bureau hereby classifies the Sol 3 system, colloquially known as Earth, as a Class X existential threat to galactic civilization. The announcement triggered the kind of bureaucratic frenzy typically reserved for actual emergencies. Emergency protocols activated across 17 star systems. Trade routes were immediately rerouted. The Galactic Defense Force began mobilizing monitoring stations. And somewhere in the vast machinery of interstellar government, forms were filed in triplicate to establish a quarantine perimeter around the Sol system. These humans, Yenthl continued, consulting his meticulously prepared notes, have demonstrated levels of violence integration that exceed all known parameters. They have weaponized entertainment, turned suffering into recreation, and appear to view conflict as the fundamental organizing principle of their civilization. The representative from the peaceful coalition of herbivorous worlds faint. The delegate from the meditation monks of Serenity Prime required immediate spiritual counseling. Even the notoriously aggressive warrior clans of the Outer Rim exchanged nervous glances and quietly updated their defense budget. Meanwhile, on the planet in question, humanity continued its daily routine with the blissful ignorance that had characterized their species since they first learned to ignore obvious warning signs. In coffee shops across the globe, baristas served caffeinated beverages to customers who had no idea their planet was now considered too dangerous for civilized contact. Office workers attended meetings about quarterly projections while bureaucrats, 20 light-years away, debated whether their species represented an evolutionary dead end or merely a temporary aberration in galactic development. Emma Holbrook, a marine biologist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, was having a particularly ordinary Thursday morning reviewing data on dolphin communication patterns when her research station's long-range sensors detected an anomaly in Earth's upper atmosphere. Something was out there, something that didn't match any known satellite configuration or atmospheric phenomenon. Probably just space junk, she muttered to her research partner, Alex Chen, who was far too absorbed in analyzing whale song frequencies to pay proper attention to mysterious objects lurking in Earth's orbital space. Neither of them realized they were looking at Advanced Monitoring Platform Epsilon 7, one of 17 surveillance stations hastily deployed by the Galactic Defense Force to keep watch over humanity's dangerously unpredictable activity. The platform's operators, two nervous crystalline entities from the regional sector, had been briefed to expect anything from primitive nuclear weapons to advanced psychological warfare techniques. What they found was Emma and Alex arguing about whether dolphins possessed a sense of humor. "I'm telling you that clicking pattern is definitely dolphin laughter," Emma insisted, pointing at her acoustic analysis charts. "They're making jokes. Or they're planning coordinated attacks on fishing vessels." Alex replied dryly, "You anthropomorphize everything." The crystalline entities monitoring this exchange immediately flagged it as evidence of humanity's infiltration tactics. They were clearly studying other species' communication methods to develop new forms of psychological warfare. The fact that they were debating whether their subjects possessed humor was obviously a cover for more sinister research objectives. Across the galaxy, similar misunderstandings multiplied exponentially. The Galactic News Network ran breaking coverage of the Earth crisis with expert panels analyzing humanity's threat level. Military strategists developed contingency plans for potential human expansion. Diplomatic corps across known space began preparing for the possibility that this aggressive species might eventually develop faster than light travel. The economic implications alone sent shockwaves through interstellar markets. Shares in defensive technologies skyrocketed. The Peaceful Trading Coalition immediately suspended all exploration activities in the local group. 3 different species began crash programs to develop new defensive capabilities, just in case these terrifying humans somehow acquired interstellar travel before evolving past their violent phase. On Zirion Prime, Director Yuntal basked in the recognition his department was receiving for identifying such a significant threat. The Bureau's budget had been increased by 30% over. He was scheduled to address the Academy of Xenological Sciences about advanced threat assessment techniques. His career had reached heights he'd never imagined possible, all thanks to the efficient work of Nex and Blix in correctly identifying humanity's dangerous nature. Neither he nor his field team had any inkling that their subjects of study were, at that very moment, engaged in activities that would have shattered their entire worldview. In New York, a group of construction workers had stopped their project to rescue a family of ducks who had nested in their work site. In Tokyo, strangers were helping an elderly man who had fallen in the subway. In London, a community was organizing a fundraiser for a local family whose house had burned down. But the most damaging evidence against the Bureau's assessment was happening in real time at the Woods Hole research station, where Dr. Holbrook had just discovered something that would have sent Nex and Blix into clinical shock. She was crying over a dataset showing declining whale populations, and Alex was comforting her with genuine empathy. "We have to do something," Emma said, wiping her eyes as she stared at the devastating statistics. "These numbers represent entire families, entire communities of living beings." "We will," Alex promised, already pulling up grant applications for conservation projects. "That's why we do this work, remember? To help them." 23 light-years away, the monitoring station flagged this conversation as evidence of humanity's advanced manipulation tactics and emotional warfare capability. The aliens couldn't conceive that beings capable of such sophisticated violence might also be capable of genuine compassion for other species. The quarantine protocols were working perfectly. Humanity remained safely contained on their dangerous little planet while the galaxy continued its business, secure in the knowledge that they were protected from Earth's violent inhabitants by the combined wisdom of their most experienced xenological assessor. The irony was so profound that it practically achieved sentience. The galaxy's most accurate early warning system had just classified its potentially greatest allies as an existential threat, ensuring that when humanity finally did reach the stars, they would encounter a universe that had spent decades preparing for war against creatures whose greatest weapon was their capacity for kindness. The universe, with its characteristic sense of cosmic irony, chose that particular Thursday afternoon to demonstrate why relying on bureaucratic assessments for species evaluation might not represent the pinnacle of scientific methodology. It began with what the Galactic Defense Force monitoring stations initially classified as a routine solar flare, a minor electromagnetic disturbance that should have posed no threat to their advanced shielding system. Unfortunately, the universe had neglected to inform the solar flare about the theoretical limits of advanced alien technology, and advanced monitoring platform Epsilon 7 found itself experiencing what technical manuals euphemistically describe as catastrophic system failure. In less scientific terms, Nex and Blix were about to become very intimate with Earth's gravitational field. Emergency protocols activated. The ship's computer announced with the kind of calm that suggested it had been programmed by beings who had never actually experienced an emergency. Hull breach in sections 4 through 7. Life support compromised. Estimated time until complete system failure, 14 minutes. Nex stared at his instruments with the expression of someone discovering that their carefully constructed worldview was about to be tested by physics. "Can we reach the backup observation post?" "Negative," Blix replied, consulting readings that continued deteriorating with impressive consistency. "We're going down." The prospect of crashing on a planet inhabited by the galaxy's most dangerous predators would have been terrifying enough under normal circumstances. But Nex and Blix had spent the better part of 3 days documenting humanity's capacity for violence, manipulation, and recreational suffering. They were about to become unwilling participants in what they fully expected would be an extended and creative demonstration of human barbarity. Their vessel streaked across Earth's afternoon sky like a falling star, trailing debris and the hopes of 2 evaluators who were rapidly revising their career choices. Emergency systems guided them toward what appeared to be a relatively unpopulated area, a stretch of ocean dotted with research vessels that the computer optimistically classified as minimal human presence. Emma Holbrook was reviewing acoustic data when the sky lit up with an object that definitely wasn't on any satellite tracking system. Her first thought was meteor. Her second thought was aircraft in distress. Her third thought, as the object splashed down roughly 2 nautical miles from her research vessel, was that her peaceful Thursday had just become significantly more complicated. "Alex, get on the radio to the Coast Guard," she called, already moving toward the emergency response equipment. "Something big just went down out there." What followed was a masterclass in the difference between theoretical xenological assessment and practical human behavior. Within minutes, Emma's research vessel was racing toward the crash site, joined by 2 fishing boats, a Coast Guard cutter, and a marine sanctuary patrol ship. None of these humans paused to consider whether the occupants of the mysterious craft might be dangerous. Their only concern was reaching potential survivors before the ocean claimed them. Nex regained consciousness to find himself suspended in what appeared to be a rescue harness, being hauled aboard a human vessel by creatures who should, by all rights have been preparing to interrogate him using advanced psychological torture techniques. Instead, they seemed primarily concerned with his breathing, pulse rate, and whether he was experiencing any pain. "Easy there," Emma said, her voice gentle as she helped secure the disoriented alien to a makeshift stretcher. "You're safe now. We're going to get you medical attention." Blix, who had maintained consciousness throughout the rescue operation, watched in stunned silence as humans risked their own safety to save two beings they had never seen before. These terrifying apex predators were treating their wounds, offering them water, and speaking in soothing tones designed to reduce stress rather than induce terror. "I don't understand," Blix whispered to his partner as human medics checked their vital signs with gentle efficiency. "Why aren't they interrogating us? Where are the torture implements? The psychological warfare specialists?" The humans, meanwhile, were engaged in the kind of coordinated emergency response that their species had perfected through millennia of actually caring about each other's welfare. Coast Guard personnel established a medical treatment area. Marine biologists offered their expertise in exotic physiology. Fishing vessel crews provided additional rescue equipment and warm blankets. Chen arrived via helicopter with a mobile medical unit and a team of specialists who had been hastily assembled from nearby research institutions. Not a single one of them suggested that these obviously non-human beings should be treated as potential threats. Their unanimous concern was providing appropriate medical care to injured survivors. "We need to establish communication," Emma said, studying the aliens' obvious distress. "They're clearly traumatized. Alex, do we have any linguist contacts who could help with translation?" Within hours, a small army of academics had converged on the research station, all united in their desire to help two beings who had quite literally fallen from the sky. Anthropologists, linguists, medical researchers, and communication specialists worked together with the kind of efficient collaboration that comes naturally to a species that has spent its evolutionary history solving problems through cooperative effort. The breakthrough came when Dr. Elena Vasquez, a communications specialist from the University of California, managed to establish basic linguistic contact through mathematical concepts and simple pictographs. The first coherent message from the aliens was a question that would have been hilarious if it hadn't been so tragically revealing of their expectations. "When does the torture begin?" Nex asked, his translation device finally syncing with human language. The silence that followed this question was broken only by the sound of several humans simultaneously realizing that their unexpected guests had somehow developed the impression that Earth was a significantly more hostile place than it actually was. "Torture," Emma repeated, her voice reflecting the confusion of an entire species that had just discovered they were apparently considered galactic bureaucrats. "Why would we torture you? You're hurt. We're trying to help you get better." The explanation that followed represented perhaps the most awkward cultural exchange in recorded history. Two alien bureaucrats, gradually realizing the scope of their misunderstanding, attempted to explain to a gathering of concerned humans how football games had been interpreted as gladiatorial combat, cooking shows as torture demonstrations, and reality television as documentary evidence of humanity's savage nature. The humans, for their part, listened with the kind of patient bewilderment typically reserved for discovering that someone has been fundamentally misunderstanding your entire civilization, based on a selective sampling of your least representative cultural export. "You thought Hell's Kitchen was actual torture?" Dr. Chen asked, his voice carefully controlled. "It's just a cooking competition. The chef yells at people, but it's basically theatrical. Nobody actually gets hurt. And you thought football was warfare," added Emma. "It's a game. Recreation. The armor is padding to prevent injuries, not actual combat gear." The revelation that humanity's most violent entertainment was actually elaborate play acting designed to minimize harm to participants sent both aliens into what could only be described as existential shock. They had spent years training to identify dangerous species, and they had just discovered that their subjects were so fundamentally peaceful that they had turned simulated conflict into a form of recreational exercise. Meanwhile, 23 light-years away, the Galactic Defense Force monitoring stations were frantically trying to interpret the data streams coming from Earth. The humans had not only captured the crashed survey team, but were apparently subjecting them to some form of advanced psychological conditioning. The aliens were being held in what appeared to be a medical facility, surrounded by humans engaged in intensive behavioral modification program. Director Yunsul convened another emergency session of the Galactic Council, this time to address the human infiltration of their surveillance operation. "They've captured our assessment team," he announced gravely. "Early reports suggest they're being subjected to advanced indoctrination techniques designed to compromise their objectivity." The truth, of course, was significantly less dramatic. Nex and Blix were recovering in the comfortable medical bay of the research station, being treated to the kind of care typically reserved for honored guests rather than dangerous prisoners. Human medical staff checked on them regularly, offered them various foods to determine their dietary preferences, and seemed genuinely concerned about their psychological well-being. "I believe," Nex said slowly to his partner, as they watched Holbrook reading to a group of local children who had come to visit the space visitors, "that we may have made an error in our assessment." Blix nodded, watching as the children, whom their reports had classified as juvenile predators in training, presented the aliens with hand-drawn pictures welcoming them to Earth. "A significant error," he agreed. "These beings appear to be—" The word hung in the air between them like a revelation. In all their years of xenological assessment, neither evaluator had encountered a species whose first response to the unknown was curiosity rather than fear, help rather than harm. The humans had pulled them from the ocean, healed their wounds, learned their language, and welcomed them with a generosity that defied every protocol in the Bureau's threat assessment manual. Over the following weeks, as Nex and Blix recovered and prepared for their eventual departure, they witnessed humanity in its natural state, messy, chaotic, frequently irrational, but fundamentally driven by an impulse toward cooperation and care that transcended species boundary. They saw humans arguing passionately about the best methods for environmental conservation, organizing fundraisers for distant catastrophes, and working late into the night on research projects designed to help other species thrive. The final insult to their professional competence came when they discovered that humans had been aware of their surveillance all along. Holbrook showed them recordings of their observation platform, explaining how Earth's scientific community had been excited about the possibility of first contact, and had been trying to figure out how to communicate with their mysterious watchers, without appearing threatening. "We knew you were there," Emma explained with the gentle patience of someone addressing particularly slow children. "We were hoping you'd eventually want to talk to us. That's why we kept doing normal things. We didn't want to scare you off." The revelation that humanity had been deliberately demonstrating their peaceful nature while the Bureau's agents interpreted their every action as evidence of violence was so profoundly embarrassing that both evaluators required sedative. When they finally departed Earth, aboard a hastily dispatched rescue vessel, Nex and Blix carried with them revised reports that would fundamentally challenge the galaxy's understanding of threat assessment, bureaucratic competence, and the dangers of jumping to conclusions based on limited data. Their new recommendation was filed in the same triplicate, bureaucratic format as their original assessment, but with significantly different conclusions. Reclassification recommended: Sol 3 inhabitants demonstrate unprecedented levels of cooperative behavior, cross-species empathy, and conflict avoidance. Recommend immediate diplomatic contact and cultural exchange programs. The galaxy, it turned out, had just spent several months preparing for war against the most aggressively helpful species in known space. The Galactic Habitability Assessment Bureau quietly retired their existing threat evaluation protocols and began developing new assessment methods that factored in the possibility that sometimes, just sometimes, the most dangerous thing about a species might be their complete lack of danger. Director Yunsul, meanwhile, found himself explaining to increasingly skeptical superiors how his department had managed to classify planetary-scale hospitality as an existential threat. His carefully constructed bureaucratic career became a cautionary tale told in xenological assessment courses across the galaxy, a reminder that even the most sophisticated evaluation methods are only as reliable as the beings operating them. And somewhere in the vast cosmic comedy of errors that passes for galactic governance, humanity continued its daily routine of being simultaneously the most violent and most peaceful species the universe had ever produced,
depending entirely on whether you understood the difference between entertainment and reality, competition and conflict, or passion and aggression. The moral of the story, if cosmic bureaucracies were capable of recognizing morals, was elegantly simple. Perhaps the next time the galaxy encountered an unknown species, they might consider actually talking to them, before deciding whether they represented a threat to civilized space. But then again, that would require admitting that the Galactic Habitability Assessment Bureau's most experienced evaluators had just spent 3 days being terrified of cooking shows and football games, and some things are simply too embarrassing for cosmic bureaucracies to acknowledge.